Imagine standing on a quiet shoreline, where once the laughter of dock workers and the bustle of ships filled the air. Now, the wind carries only whispers of a town that thrived and vanished. What stories do these forgotten places hold, and why did history let them slip away? Number 12. Indianola, Texas. Walking along the quiet shoreline of Matagorda Bay, where tall grass now bends in the coastal wind, it's difficult to imagine that Indianola was once one of the most important port towns in Texas. Founded in 1844, Indianola quickly grew into a thriving Gulf Coast community, serving as a major entry point for immigrants arriving from Europe and a vital shipping hub for goods moving inland. In the mid-19th century, this was a place full of movement and promise. Ships arrived carrying supplies, furniture, and hopeful settlers seeking new lives on the Texas frontier. Cotton, hides, and other exports flowed outward through Indianola's docks, connecting the young state to broader markets. Local historical societies note that Indianola was once considered a serious rival to Galveston, with hotels, churches, schools, and busy streets lined with wooden homes facing the water. What sustained Indianola was its position. Geography made it valuable. The town's harbor allowed commerce to flourish, and for a time, its future seemed secure. Families built lives around the steady rhythm of port activity. Dock workers unloading cargo, merchants opening their shops, and travelers passing through on their way west. Yet, Indianola's story is also a reminder of how fragile prosperity can be along the Gulf. In 1875, a devastating hurricane tore into the coast, destroying much of the town's infrastructure. Buildings collapsed, ships thrown inland, and entire neighborhoods were left in ruins. Residents rebuilt with determination, unwilling to let the town disappear. But nature returned again. In 1886, a second catastrophic hurricane struck, even more destructive than the first. After that storm, many families made the painful decision to leave. According to state historical records, the port never recovered, and Indianola slowly faded as commerce shifted towards safer, more protected harbors. Today, little remains beyond scattered foundations, weathered bricks, and the quiet cemetery where headstones still bear the names of those who once believed in the town's future. Visitors sometimes describe a strange stillness here, where the only sounds are waves brushing the shore and wind moving through the grass. Locals have long said that on certain evenings, the coast feels unusually heavy with memory, as if the bay itself remembers the voices, the ship bells, and the bustling life that once filled this place. Walking here today feels like stepping into a forgotten chapter of Texas history, one shaped by ambition, endurance, and the unstoppable power of the sea. What makes Indianola stand out is not legend or spectacle, but the quiet reminder that even the busiest towns can vanish, leaving only traces behind. Number 11. Thurber, Texas. Driving through the open country west of Fort Worth, it's easy to pass by Thurber without realizing what once stood here. Today, it feels like a quiet patch of Texas landscape with a few surviving brick buildings. But in the late 19th century, Thurber was one of the most important industrial towns in the state, built almost entirely around coal. Founded in the 1880s, Thurber grew rapidly under the Texas and Pacific Coal Company. At a time when railroads depended on coal to run their locomotives, this town became a vital fuel source for the expanding transportation network across Texas. Mines opened, workers arrived, and the settlement transformed into a busy company town almost overnight. What sustained Thurber was industry and the constant demand for energy. Rows of company-owned houses were built for miners and their families. Businesses appeared along the main streets, including stores, saloons, hotels, and schools. Local historical societies note that Thurber was also unusual for its diverse immigrant population, with Italians, Polish, and Mexican laborers living alongside Anglo settlers. For a time, the town reflected the complex social fabric of industrial America right in the middle of rural Texas. By the early 1900s, Thurber was thriving. The town even developed its own brickworks, producing sturdy materials that still remain today in scattered structures. Life here revolved around the mines, long shifts underground, busy evenings in town, and the shared routines of a working community. But Thurber's decline came as quickly as its rise. In the 1920s, coal was no longer the dominant fuel source. Texas oil fields were booming, and railroads began switching from coal-powered engines to cheaper alternatives. As demand collapsed, the mines shut down. Families moved away in waves, leaving homes empty and storefronts abandoned. By the 1930s, Thurber had become a ghost town in but name. Today, visitors can still see remnants of its past, the old brick smokestack, crumbling foundations, and restored buildings that hint at the town's former size. Visitors sometimes describe a strange quiet here, as if the land is holding its breath. Walking through Thurber today feels like stepping into the shadow of Texas's industrial era. What makes this town stand out is not folklore alone, but the reality of how quickly progress can erase an entire community, leaving only brick, dust, and memory behind. Number 10. Lobo, Texas. Far out in the wide-open desert of West Texas, near the edge of the Mexican border, lies the near-forgotten settlement of Lobo. Even seasoned travelers can drive for miles across the empty landscape without realizing a town ever existed here. But in the late 19th century, this isolated place was once a small marker of human life and ambition in one of Texas's harshest environments. Lobo was established in the early 1880s, during a period when ranching communities and trading outposts were spreading across the western frontier. The town's purpose was modest but practical. It served as a stop for ranchers, travelers, and workers moving through the region, offering basic supplies, mail service, and a small sense of connection in an otherwise remote expanse. What sustained Lobo was the ranching economy. Cattle operations dominated this part of Texas, and small settlements like Lobo became gathering points where families could trade goods, share news, and access the necessities of daily life. A general store, a post office, and a few homes formed the center of the community. Regional archives suggest that Lobo never grew large, but for those who lived here, it was a vital outpost against the isolation of the desert. Yet the same remoteness that gave Lobo its identity also limited its future. Railroads and major highways bypassed the area, and as transportation routes shifted toward larger towns, fewer travelers passed through. By the mid-20th century, residents began leaving for places with more opportunity, more water, and more stability. Population decline came slowly but steadily until the town was nearly empty. By the 1970s, Lobo had become almost entirely abandoned. Today, what remains are scattered ruins, collapsed structures, weathered foundations, and the faint outlines of streets that once held everyday life. Rusting remnants of old vehicles and broken fences stand against the desert backdrop, slowly being reclaimed by sand and time. Locals have long said that Lobo feels unusually quiet, even for the desert. Visitors sometimes describe the sensation of standing in a place where the past feels close, not through dramatic legends, but through silence itself. Walking here today feels like stepping into the forgotten margins of Texas history, where ordinary lives unfolded far from the centers of progress. What makes Lobo stand out is its solitude. It is a reminder that many towns did not fall with fanfare or catastrophe. They simply faded, leaving only dust, wind, and the lingering impression of human presence in the vast West Texas plains. Number 9. Spur, Texas. Out on the broad plains of West Texas, where the horizon feels endless and the sky stretches wide above the land, the town of Spur carries the quiet marks of a community shaped by agriculture, endurance, and gradual change. Unlike some places that vanish overnight, Spur's story is not one of sudden collapse, but of slow fading, one generation at a time. Spur was founded in 1898 during a period when railroads were still shaping the future of Texas. Built along the route of the Chicago, Rock Island, and Gulf Railway, the town quickly became a local center for cotton farming and cattle ranching. Its location made it an important gathering point for surrounding rural families who depended on Spur for trade, supplies, and connection. What sustained Spur was the steady rhythm of agricultural life. Cotton gins, livestock markets, and small businesses lined the downtown streets. Churches and schools formed the backbone of the community, and for much of the early 20th century, Spur represented the kind of hard-working plains town that helped define rural Texas. Local historical societies note that several early brick buildings still stand, reminders of a time when the town was growing and optimistic. There were storefronts, cafes, and busy sidewalks where neighbors knew one another by name. Life here moved at the pace of the seasons, planting, harvest, drought, and renewal. But Spur, like many small farming towns across the American South and West, began to change as the century progressed. Mechanization reduced the need for farm labor. Larger agribusiness operations replaced smaller family farms. Younger generations left for cities like Lubbock, Dallas, or Houston, drawn by education, jobs, and modern opportunity. The decline was gradual, not dramatic. Spur never became completely abandoned, but the population steadily shrank. Empty houses appeared at the edges of town. Old businesses closed their doors, leaving faded signs and quiet storefronts behind. Visitors today sometimes notice the contrast between the living town that remains and the silent structures that speak of busier decades. Walking through Spur now feels reflective, almost contemplative. Visitors sometimes describe a stillness here, not eerily in a sensational way, but deeply atmospheric, as if the town is holding on to memories of the life it once carried. What makes Spur stand out is its quiet persistence. It reminds us that forgotten towns are not always erased completely. Sometimes they linger, half alive, half historical, standing beneath the wide Texas sky, shaped by time, change, and the slow drift of people away. Number 8. Shafter, Texas. Deep in the rugged terrain of far west Texas, where the desert mountains rise against the horizon and the landscape feels both harsh and beautiful, lies the nearly forgotten mining settlement of Shafter. Today, it is quiet and remote, but in the late 19th century, Shafter represented hope, industry, and the promise of wealth hidden beneath the ground. Shafter began in the 1880s as a silver mining town, part of a broader wave of mineral exploration that swept through the American Southwest. Prospectors were drawn here by the discovery of rich silver deposits, and soon a small community formed around the mines. At its height, Shafter supported several hundred residents, including miners, merchants, and families trying to build stable lives in an isolated region. What sustained Shafter was the silver industry. Mining operations provided jobs and drew workers from across Texas and beyond. The town developed essential structures, a school, a general store, small homes, and gathering places that offered comfort against the surrounding desert emptiness. Local historical societies note that Shafter was once considered one of the more productive silver districts in Texas, even if it never reached the scale of larger boom towns out west. Life here was shaped by labor and endurance. Days were long, the climate unforgiving, and the town depended entirely on what could be pulled from the earth. Yet within that harsh setting, community still existed. Children attended school, families shared meals, and miners gathered after shifts, holding on to routine and resilience. But like many mining towns, Shafter's prosperity was never permanent. By the early 20th century, silver yields began to decline and the cost of extraction grew higher. As mining slowed, families started leaving, drawn toward more stable work in larger towns and cities. The town's population dwindled steadily, and many of its buildings were eventually abandoned. By mid-century, Shafter had largely faded into the desert landscape. Today, visitors find only remnants, weathered foundations, scattered ruins, and rusting equipment that hints at the town's former purpose. The desert wind moves through empty spaces where voices once carried, and the silence feels profound. Locals have long said that Shafter holds a particular stillness, as if the land itself remembers the effort and ambition that once filled this place. Visitors sometimes describe walking here as stepping into a preserved fragment of Texas's mining past, where history lingers not through spectacle but through absence. What makes Shafter stand out is its connection to a lesser-known chapter of Texas history, a reminder that even in the most remote corners of the state, people once built communities around hope, hard work, and the fragile promise of the ground beneath their feet. Number 7. Luckenbach, Texas. Tucked into the rolling hills and oak-lined roads of the Texas Hill Country, Luckenbach feels less like a town and more like a preserved memory. Today, it is often associated with music and culture, but its origins are far quieter, rooted in the everyday lives of immigrants who carved out communities in rural Texas during the 19th century. Luckenbach was founded in 1849 by German settlers, part of a broader wave of immigration that shaped much of central Texas. These families arrived seeking farmland, stability, and a chance to build something lasting. The town grew slowly, never becoming large, but serving as a modest rural center where neighbors gathered, traded goods, and shared traditions brought from across the Atlantic. What sustained Luckenbach was agriculture and community. Small farms surrounded the settlement, and the town's general store and post office became essential meeting points. In places like this, daily life moved at a slower rhythm, marked by planting seasons, church gatherings, and conversations exchanged along dusty roads. Local historical societies note that Luckenbach remained small even during its most active years. It was never an industrial hub or a railroad boomtown. Instead, it endured as a quiet rural outpost, shaped by heritage and human connection more than commerce. But as the 20th century progressed, towns like Luckenbach began to fade. Younger generations left for larger cities, rural economies shifted, and many small settlements across Texas saw their population decline. By the mid-century, Luckenbach was nearly abandoned, with only a few residents remaining and several buildings falling into disuse. What survived, however, was the town's spirit. The old general store, the dance hall, and a handful of historic structures remained standing, weathered but intact. Over time, Luckenbach became known not because it grew, but because it refused to disappear completely. Visitors sometimes describe the town as timeless, a place where modern life feels distant. Walking here today feels like stepping into another era, where the past lingers in wooden floorboards, faded signs, and the quiet space between buildings. Locals have long said that Luckenbach carries stories in its silence, of immigrant families, of rural celebrations, and of generations who lived simply but meaningfully. The atmosphere is not frightening, but gently mysterious, as if the town exists halfway between history and the present. What makes Luckenbach stand out is its rare blend of fading settlement and cultural endurance. It reminds us that not all forgotten towns vanish into ruins. Some remain as quiet landmarks of memory, holding on to the character of Texas long after the crowds have moved on. Number 6. Byers, Texas. In the remote stretches of West Texas, far from the highways and small towns that dot the plains, lies the ghostly remnants of Byers, a town that once held quiet promise, but is now reclaimed by the desert winds and time. Today, very little remains. Weathered foundations, a few scattered fences, and a small cemetery hint at the lives of the families and ranchers who tried to tame this isolated land. Yet in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Byers was a modest but determined community, shaped by the harsh environment and the grit of its settlers. Byers was founded in the 1880s, a period when ranching and small-scale farming were spreading across West Texas. Its location offered a practical stop for ranchers moving cattle, traders, and a few families willing to endure isolation for opportunity. The town had a general store, post office, and several modest homes, all built with local materials suited to the dry, sun-baked plains. According to regional historical records, the town never grew large, but it was enough to foster a sense of community for the families who remained here, bound together by necessity, endurance, and shared hardship. What sustained Byers was primarily ranching. Cattle and sheep roamed the surrounding plains, and small plots of farmland supported the residents. Life followed the rhythms of the desert: long, scorching summers, occasional harsh winters, and reliance on scarce water sources. The town's residents worked closely together, creating a network of mutual support that allowed daily life to continue despite the challenges of isolation. Churches, schools, and informal gatherings reinforced social ties, giving Byers a sense of quiet resilience. Gradually, however, Byers began to fade. Railroads bypassed the settlement, younger generations moved to larger towns in search of opportunity, and droughts or economic hardships made survival increasingly difficult. Homes were abandoned, businesses shuttered, and streets emptied. By the mid-20th century, the town was largely deserted, leaving behind the skeletal remains of a once functioning community. Today, only the wind-swept remnants remain, as if the desert itself has reclaimed the land. Walking through Byers today, visitors are struck by the stillness. The desert wind rustles over foundations, fences, and the small cemetery, carrying the memory of lives that endured the challenges of West Texas. Locals have long said that it feels like stepping into a frozen chapter of history, where human effort and isolation meet in a hauntingly quiet landscape. What makes Byers stand out is its profound emptiness, a town not destroyed by violence or disaster, but slowly surrendered to time and nature. It is a place where the echoes of ordinary life linger, and visitors can sense the quiet persistence and eventual disappearance of human ambition in the heart of West Texas.
Number 5. Terlingua, Texas. On the rugged edge of the Big Bend region, where the desert mountains rise from the earth and the horizon feels impossibly distant, the town of Terlingua sits as one of Texas's most striking reminders of boom and bust history. Today, its ruins draw visitors from across the country, but Terlingua began as something far more practical, a mining town built around the hope of prosperity hidden beneath the desert floor. Terlingua's story began in the 1880s when prospectors discovered cinnabar, the ore used to produce mercury. Mining operations expanded quickly, and by the early 20th century, Terlingua had grown into a thriving company town. Workers and their families settled here, building adobe homes, shops, and essential community structures in the harsh environment of far west Texas. What sustained Terlingua was the mercury industry. Especially around World War I, mercury was in high demand for industrial and military uses. The mines provided steady work, and for a time, the town became a lively desert settlement filled with the routines of daily life. Miners heading out before sunrise, families gathering in the evenings, and merchants supplying the needs of a growing population. Local historical societies note that Terlingua was once far more active than its crumbling ruins suggest today. It had a school, a post office, and a sense of community that persisted despite the isolation. Life here required endurance, shaped by intense heat, limited water, and the constant dust of the desert wind. But like many mining towns, Terlingua's prosperity was fragile. By the 1940s, the cinnabar deposits began to decline, and mining became less profitable. As operations slowed and eventually stopped, jobs disappeared. Families moved away in search of stability elsewhere, leaving homes abandoned and streets quiet. Terlingua did not fall in a single moment. It emptied gradually until the desert began to reclaiming what people had built. Today, visitors find scattered adobe ruins, rusting machinery, and the remains of the old cemetery where headstones quietly mark the lives of those who once believed in the town's future. Stories still linger here. Locals have long said that Terlingua feels strangely suspended in time, especially at dusk, when the shadows stretch across broken walls and the silence becomes almost complete. Visitors sometimes describe walking through the ruins as deeply reflective, as if the desert itself holds the memory of ambition, labor, and loss. What makes Terlingua stand out is its haunting beauty, not in a sensational way, but in the quiet reminder of how quickly a thriving community can fade when the industry sustaining it disappears, leaving only echoes beneath the wide Texas sky.
Number 4. Marathon, Texas. Nestled in the heart of West Texas, where the Chisos Mountains rise in the distance and the desert stretches endlessly under an expansive sky, the small town of Marathon offers a quiet testament to the resilience of frontier communities. Today, it feels almost timeless, a serene stop along the route to Big Bend National Park. Yet Marathon's story stretches back more than a century, shaped by ranching, trade, and the determination of early settlers who carved out a life in this remote region. Marathon was established in the 1880s, during a period when settlers were moving into the Big Bend area, seeking land, water, and opportunity. Its location made it a practical hub for ranchers, farmers, and travelers navigating the rugged terrain. The town grew slowly but steadily, anchored by a general store, post office, and a few homes built of local stone and timber. Churches and small schools provided social structure, while community gatherings and shared work forged strong bonds among its residents. According to regional archives, Marathon's survival was due largely to the perseverance and adaptability of those who called it home. What sustained Marathon was its connection to the land and the surrounding ranching economy. Cattle and sheep were raised across the vast plains, while small-scale farming supplemented local life. Residents relied on one another to meet challenges posed by the desert climate, harsh summers, scarce rainfall, and isolation from larger population centers. Life in Marathon was a delicate balance of labor, community, and careful stewardship of natural resources. Yet the town's history is also marked by gradual change. As highways bypassed small settlements and younger generations moved towards cities like Alpine or Fort Stockton, the population slowly declined. Businesses closed or consolidated, and many homes were left empty. Unlike ghost towns, however, Marathon never completely disappeared. A small but steady community remains, preserving the town's history and continuing traditions rooted in ranching and local culture. Visitors today often remark on the quiet stillness of Marathon. Walking through the streets, the distant mountains frame the town like a natural monument, while wind rustles through desert grasses as if carrying echoes of the past. Locals have long said that this town preserves the memory of early settlers' perseverance and the rhythms of frontier life, offering a reflective glimpse into Texas history. What makes Marathon stand out is its enduring presence in a vast, remote landscape. It is a town shaped not by dramatic events or fleeting industry, but by the patience, resilience, and quiet determination of its people. A living reminder of the history that quietly endures in the heart of West Texas.
Number 3. Bragg, Texas. Tucked into the rugged desert terrain of West Texas, where the mountains meet vast stretches of sun-baked plains, lies the abandoned town of Bragg. Today, the remnants are subtle, weathered foundations, scattered fencing, and the occasional rusted fragment of a once thriving community. Yet, in the late 19th century, Bragg represented the quiet determination of settlers willing to endure isolation, scarcity, and the relentless challenges of frontier life.
Bragg was established in the 1880s during a period of westward expansion when ranchers, traders, and families sought opportunity on the remote plains of West Texas. Its location provided a modest hub for local ranching operations and small-scale trade. The town included a few wooden homes, a general store, a post office, and a schoolhouse. According to local historical societies, although Bragg never grew into a large settlement, it served as a vital anchor for the surrounding landscape, offering a place of community in an otherwise isolated region. What sustained Bragg was its connection to ranching in the harsh but productive desert land. Families raised cattle and sheep, cultivated small plots for subsistence, and relied heavily on cooperation to survive. Life here followed the rhythm of the seasons in the desert climate, harsh summers, occasional winter freezes, and the constant search for reliable water. Social structures, such as church gatherings and community meetings, provided cohesion and a sense of shared purpose, even as the town remained small and isolated. Over time, Bragg's isolation became an insurmountable challenge. The railroad bypassed the settlement, younger generations moved toward larger towns, and droughts and economic shifts made life increasingly difficult. Gradually, homes were abandoned, streets emptied, and buildings fell into disrepair. By the mid-20th century, Bragg had largely faded, leaving only the skeletal remains of human habitation quietly reclaimed by the desert sands. Walking through Bragg today evokes a profound stillness. Visitors notice the faint outlines of streets and foundations, the rustling of dry grasses in the wind, and the distant mountains looming like silent witnesses. Locals have long said that the town carries the memory of perseverance and hardship, where daily life once unfolded amid isolation, and the quiet disappearance of the community leaves a haunting impression. What makes Bragg stand out is its stark, unassuming eeriness, a town whose emptiness tells a story of human endurance and eventual retreat, offering a reflective glimpse into the life and decline of small frontier settlements in West Texas. The ruins of Bragg remind visitors that history is often preserved in silence, wind, and the gradual reclamation of human effort by the desert.
Number 2. Elkhart, Texas.
Nestled among the gently rolling hills and wooded stretches of east-central Texas, Elkhart appears today as a quiet, modest community. Yet its story reflects the slow, patient rhythms of rural Texas life, shaped by agriculture, family, and the steady passage of time. Founded in the mid-1800s, Elkhart began as a small settlement for farming families moving westward, seeking fertile land, safety, and the opportunity to build lasting communities away from the busier coastal cities. In its early years, Elkhart grew slowly but purposefully. Settlers constructed wooden homes, a general store, a post office, and a small schoolhouse, creating the nucleus of a community that would serve the surrounding farms. Churches became both spiritual and social centers, hosting gatherings, celebrations, and quiet discussions that strengthened local ties. According to local historical societies, the town thrived not through industry or commerce, but through the cooperative labor and shared perseverance of its residents. What sustained Elkhart was its connection to the land. Families planted crops, raised livestock, and worked together to maintain the town's modest infrastructure. Life here followed the seasons, planting, tending, harvesting, and occasional fairs or community events that brought together families spread across the countryside. For decades, Elkhart was a place of stability, a small, predictable rhythm that reflected the values and endurance of rural Texas families. Yet the town's fortunes gradually shifted. Economic changes, including agricultural mechanization and the consolidation of farms, reduced the need for labor in the area. Younger generations left for larger cities like Houston, Dallas, or Austin, seeking education, employment, and modern conveniences. Over time, population declined, some businesses closed, and the once bustling streets quieted. Unlike a sudden collapse, Elkhart faded gradually, leaving behind the sense of a town still lived in, but diminished in scale. Walking through Elkhart today, visitors notice the quiet charm of its preserved streets, the aged oak trees lining the avenues, and the enduring presence of historic homes and buildings. Locals have long said that the town's stillness carries memories of daily life, of school bells, church gatherings, and families working the land, a living echo of the community that once formed the heart of this region. What makes Elkhart stand out is its steadfast charm and resilience, a reminder that history is not always marked by dramatic events or bustling industry, but often by the quiet persistence of ordinary people, shaping their lives, passing traditions, and leaving subtle, enduring marks on the Texas landscape.
Number 1. Old Terrell. Far out in the rugged expanse of West Texas, near the Davis Mountains, lies the remnants of Old Terrell, a town long abandoned yet still whispering the stories of those who once called it home. Today, only crumbling foundations, weathered fences, and a quiet cemetery mark its existence. But in the late 19th century, this settlement represented hope and survival on the harsh frontier. Old Terrell was established in the 1880s, during a period when ranchers, traders, and settlers were moving into the remote areas of West Texas. Its location offered a modest crossroads for families seeking land and opportunity, though the surrounding desert and rugged terrain posed constant challenges. The town grew slowly, with wooden homes, a small general store, a post office, and a few communal structures that anchored daily life. According to regional archives, the town's population never exceeded a few hundred, but for those who lived here, it was a bustling center of connection in an otherwise isolated landscape. What sustained Old Terrell was its proximity to ranching operations and the occasional trade route. Life moved with the seasons, cattle drives in the warmer months, small harvests from irrigated patches of land, and evenings spent gathering with neighbors. Churches and schools provided community cohesion, and the residents' perseverance against drought, extreme heat, and distance from larger towns defined the character of life here. Local historical societies note that the town's existence was always fragile, dependent on both human resilience and the mercy of the West Texas climate. Gradually, however, Old Terrell began to decline. Railroads bypassed the settlement, water was scarce, and economic opportunity shifted towards larger towns and growing cities in the region. Families left in search of better prospects, leaving behind abandoned homes, empty streets, and the occasional rusting artifact of everyday life. By the mid-20th century, the town was largely deserted, leaving only traces of a once thriving community slowly returning to the desert. Walking through Old Terrell today, visitors encounter silence almost total, broken only by the whispering wind or the distant call of birds. Locals have long said that the desert itself seems to hold memory here, and visitors sometimes describe a subtle unease, not from legend, but from the stillness of a place where life once flourished and then quietly receded. What makes Old Terrell stand out is its haunting tranquility. It is a town defined not by dramatic disasters, but by the quiet disappearance of human endeavor, a reminder of how even the most determined communities can fade, leaving only echoes of past lives etched into the West Texas landscape.